Let's see.
Hello and most welcome to 852. As you can see, it's rather sunny here. I'm standing surrounded by white walls and they're all reflecting the lights. So it is stark bright here and even rather warm. I will today talk about opening up of knowledge. We have mentioned earlier that knowledge is being on the retreat for a rather long time. We have talked about closing of the American mind by Bloom. We also mentioned how the old literature, traditions, old ceremonies, liturgy, everything that has this knowledgeable character is disappearing at an alarming pace. And that makes us think that maybe knowledge as itself is somewhere disappearing from the earth. Although that might be a tempting pessimistic view to take, I would say there's no need for that level of pessimism. I would even say that that sort of pessimism isn't even vaguely correct. It comes from the idea of a formal system, and that the formal system is both consistent and coherent. The sense of groundedness that this vision gives us is a falsity, even for ourselves. It doesn't ground us. Instead, all levels go together in the method of deconstruction. And as these walls around me here are reflecting the light, making it almost desert-like in here, the same goes for knowledge. It is constantly reflecting, amplifying itself. And it's these limitations that we think that consistent systems are establishing itself and become firm foundations that are impenetrable. I have to say a Swedish word here, oomkullrunkliga, and that means unable to be moved, unmovable. I think this tendency can be summarized in reality is reality and it's nothing we can do. Well, that in itself has a lot of assumption already built into it. Some things are fairly well already established here. Deconstruction is about seeing that the limitations that the text sets is nothing short of an illusion, I would say, in the end. It disappears anyway. It's like early morning cloudiness. When the sun comes, it shines its gleaming, wonderful light, its warmth, and the clouds dissolves. The same goes for these unnecessary limits on knowledge. The idea that if you have a physical worldview, that will exclude anything mental. I think that is something that has casted a shadow of all thinking all religious activity since at least the Middle Ages. That's mutual excluding of the other. And you have to make a choice between material or spiritual. For a long time, the choice was most frequently to go against the material and only have the spiritual. And thereby, the material became something bad, something tainted, something tempting as well. Earthly temptations. Those are definitely things that holds badness to them. That's the whole idea, that if we have a material world, we cannot have a spiritual world. It's very similar. If we have a consistent system, there can be no outside onlooker. That is actually one of these paradoxes or riddles that comes from also mathematics, like Gödel. And it's called the Turing stopping problem. And it means there can be no stopping procedure within the mathematical or programmable system. So if you're starting to do a calculation, nothing within the system can tell you this is never ever going to come to its conclusion. That's called a non-stopping procedure. And we usually say, for it to be stopped, we need a human being to be there and be able to terminate the action by hitting the stopping button or entering a code and then putting enter. And that's the reflective self, that's the ego. That's the true source of something that is above. Something that is meta. I come to learn it means after to, but since the metaphysics was at the end of Aristotle's, it was after the physics, and it became to be known as meta. So meta can be both after, but it can also be on top, on the side. It can be within. And that is one of the reasons Douglas Hofstadter, in his famous book Gödel Bach, set out to find openings of knowledge, opening for ourselves to enter into the Turing game and play a role, be conscious, controlling, guiding of our, for instance, our own thinking system. Something that most people today thinks is impossible, just because the idea of consistent, coherent thinking system. You see, the grounding idea that everything could be consistent and coherent is the very limitation. And that makes you think that your thinking in itself is enough. We don't need a higher level, or there is no possibility. I think the latter is more correct. There is no possibility for anything above and higher. We have reached the highest level. It doesn't get any more above than it already is. Let me paint two different pictures. The first picture, you are in the game. That could be the Turing example with a programmable executing code that runs and runs trying to calculate figures. It might be the square root of -2 or something similar. It runs and everything is within the system. It has to be within the system because the illusion of coherency and consistency makes everything within. Nothing can be outside. And the same goes for Gödel's example of mathematics. Since we are tricked until Gödel, many mathematicians thought from 1900 to 1927, I think it was, Gödel came with his famous theorem. Until then, there were several mathematicians that thought that mathematics could be contained within itself. It could be self-explanatory. And that means only one level. I'm making a ball here, but you can also think of it as a set, something within the set, and there is nothing outside the set. So this first principle will also adhere to our own thinking, our whole world. It is, in a way, consistent and coherent in itself. It leaves nothing for the outside. Nothing can be outside the universe. And this, I think, is fairly sure to create this limitation that thinking our souls are in the system. A conclusion that leads to the hard problem of consciousness. And I think that is what Daniel Dennett actually said. It's unsolvable, and I agree. But it's unsolvable because the terms that sets the problem are in itself. They are themselves defunct. Those limitations do not hold. But I will come to that later when I go into the Model 2. This whole thing leads us to think that there is an absolute limitation of everything. It doesn't sound like a limitation, but trust me, it really is. It means that your own thinking is sufficient. Nothing needs to be outside because the thinking does its own job. It's just like mathematics as Hilbert thought. It is self-contained, nothing needs to be above, after, under, or even on a position high up. After Gödel, everything changed. And oddly enough, neither Hilbert nor Gödel thought this was an interesting conclusion. And that goes to show, well, they thought it was, of course they thought it was an interesting conclusion, but they didn't think it was a good conclusion. That is something I do not agree on. I think it's the best thing that ever happened. It's right up there with quantum mechanics and Jacques Derrida. It is absolutely fantastic because it shows that we don't have to have this limitation, that a computer system can be closed. And that also shows a lot about what are the limitations for artificial intelligence. These might sound negative in a limited sense. If you work in the artificial intelligence, it might sound bad, but for us as human beings, we understand that that limitation doesn't hold for us. We can go beyond. We can actually have a reflective consciousness, something mirroring everything, participating, but at the very same time be different. And this, of course, leads me to option number 2. That is that we take the consequences of Gödel, we take the consequences of Turing, we take the consequences of quantum mechanics, and we also take the indications shown by Jacques Derrida, and we take the very method of Gachet, and then we understand that's an unnecessary limitation. We can be outside the text, we can be inside the text. Derrida often says, I'm a virus occupying the text, but at the very same time not being there. And I think that's one of the most vivid pictures I've ever gotten from Derrida. It's fantastic. He says, I inhabit the text. And that means he can become the text, but he can also be different at the very same time. Difference and identity is something that can occur at the very same second. And this is the reason I previously mentioned identity. Identity as an isolated reflection, it becomes a pretty hard limitation on knowledge and the possibilities of us human beings to do things, to think things. And it sets limitations to what we can be, what we can believe. It sets limitations to what our thinking is, and how our thoughts are. And this second model, those limitations simply just don't hold. And I think this goes in stages. First, there is a realization that these people were absolutely correct. They are unquestioned. Until this day, Gödel and Turing, none of them have been questioned. Their conclusions are correct. They do hold. And that means absolutely positive. This is good. This is the gospel from reality and spirituality. It's a gift from God. It means that our shackles that we thought that we were bound to the earth, or bound to our own thinking, or bound to the limits of our own skin, or bound to the molecules or atoms, you name it, it simply doesn't hold. And that also means that you can gain a liberty in your own body. You can yet once more become balanced. And I would call that balancing up. You become meta yourself. And that's a process that is absolutely at the same time as you entering a new mode of thinking, where you can inhabit your own thinking just like Derrida inhabits the text, but you can also be above it and separate from it at the very same time. I don't think it's too far of a guess to say that most people are absolutely bound to these conclusions, because these are mostly pre-mental or pre-thought. They are like a gestalt. Just to give an example how stern and strong these convictions are, when I first had my quantum mechanic classes with Shell, I think his name was, or was it Leonard? I do not remember right now. But he just told us a class earlier, 1 week earlier only, or was it 2 weeks, that quantum mechanics is choice. Everything can go two ways. It could be a particle, it could be a wave. And that means free choice is inherent in the physical world as well as in the mental world. It wasn't an illusion that we have free will. And that was the message, and I think it was loud and clear. And the very next week I made a mini lecture together with a colleague, Lena, do you remember her name? And we were just playing on this for a short while, 10 minutes, small lecture about the possibility of a free will and quantum mechanics and the collapse of the superposition. That is in itself choice. That's a meta without a doubt. If there ever was a meta, that's one of those metas, doubtlessly. After the mini lecture, a friend of mine, Rickard from Värmland, came up to me. We're standing outside, he's smoking, I sip my regular coffee. And he said to me, "That was a very interesting lecture, congrats." Well, nothing special, I said, just something that we do together just before class. And then he said, "But of course, free will is an impossibility." So no matter the previous lecture, the study material we had, my mini lecture that happened just a couple of minutes before, the very perception of the limitations, that is deciding whether a person thinks we have a free will or not. And I think what he said was probably correct for 99% of the population, including a lot of quantum mechanics, people from quantum mechanics. It's such perceptible thing of reality. You really feel consistency. You really feel consistency, coherence and everything. And that Sweden is a system that works without any cutting corners. It's parted by its own border. Everything that exists within Sweden is determined by different rules, laws, regulations. Nothing is above, under, or before. But this is something that simply doesn't hold truth. It is not correct. This idea of a slutet system, of a closed system, is wrong. And that everything to explain the system would be inside the system. And I think you hear now the same goes not only for Sweden or the town of Gothenburg or the municipality of Floda or any other thing. It goes for the universe. This idea of closedness, that universe is a limitation itself. It's a limitation both in the spatial sense, in the way that everything within the universe decides the universe. There's nothing meta-universe, after, above, and nothing can inhabit the universe and be different from the universe. Those are perceived, this is important, they are perceived to be limitations. This is the very reason we need to work with this bodily and mindfully at the very same time. Cannot do one thing only, because it's a perception. And perception, when they fight with arguments and even proofs doesn't matter. The perception is more important. That is what tells you what is right, even though you can prove the perception to be wrong. I would say the proof that Bach, all they do, it's an incredibly good start, but after that you need to go further. You need to get into the deconstruction as a body and mind process that takes in the body and liberates the body, so to speak, at the same time we liberate mind and thinking and intellectuality. How often haven't you heard, when it comes to rationality, discussions within academia, politics, newspapers, sometimes even sport, that there is an exclusion constantly taking place, and that we cannot allow for contradictions, like inhabiting the text and still be something separated from it. How we cannot take contradictions, and this is have become a whole series of contradictions, or a series about contradictions, but I mentioned few traits that doesn't hold for contradictions. They are not generalizable. Second, they are not universalized. Third, when they meet their contrary, the other side of the contradiction, it's not necessary so that they become nullified, zero and zilch. No, they are not exact mirror images of each other. So take the mirror image and the thing looking into the mirror, they're never the same. That's a clue. That's a perception you should sort of linger on to. That's a more healthy perception that leads you in the right way. It doesn't put you into this problematic situation of contradictions ruling everything, and everything within the set needs to be free of contradictions, because they attack each other, they make everything irrational, inconsequential, not working. No, it is not true. Forget that. It is proven not to hold. It's proven. See, it is a good start. It's the first leg of an endless journey into knowledge, into a limitless universe, where something can be in the universe, but at the very same time outside of it, because these things simply do not hold. So the very same thing that sort of makes the hard divisions between inside and outside the Klein bottle, the Möbius strip, they help to loosen up this hardened thinking, this frictionful thinking, this heavy thinking. I can feel the heaviness. I noticed it more and more. I'm quite heavy now, since the warmth is heating me up. My thinking also become denser. Not necessarily so, but it's important to note the differences, and that you can note that, and that you can be intimate with your thoughts, you can mirror them, but you can also at the very same time be completely different. And it's not a mystery. This is not a mysterious experience. It's every day, and it's accessible in this very second. And that will also make it possible to have the future already here. And that makes it influenceable, it makes it touchable, it makes it enterable. You can go into it and you can inhabit it, and look here, I got a little mini Klein bottle. Think about the whole system. This is another way of showing it. It goes into itself. It's interpenetrable, interpenetrationable. I can hardly pronounce it, sorry about that. But it interpenetrates itself. And this interpenetration is the most important thing to remember about the function of space. And it means that something can at the very same time be outside but also be on the inside. And think about this straw, that is actually part of folded outside. If I open up the straw, it shows itself to be both inside and outside at the very same time. Thank God, I was almost thinking there for a moment that I destroyed the straw. Very thirsty, so that's most important that I can access some of this delicious Coca-Cola liquid. An excellent day for hydration. A very important aspect of space is that it's constantly interpenetrate itself. And this is of course the subject looking into the object. We can inhabit our own thinking system, but space allows us to be outside of the limitations. So you see here how this is something we actually perceive. It is coming from reality itself, but it's not a necessary limitation. It's not a rule that needs to be obeyed. We can choose to obey it, but once we understand it's a rule that we acquired from our own perception, we can loosen it up. We see it's not necessary. It's not a necessary trait of space itself. And this is the second stage. The first stage is logical. It has the proofs. There your journey starts. This is now you are easing up your intellectual limit, so to speak. At this first level, it is still not life-changing. It's extremely interesting. It's enough for long, inflammable, deepening discussions within yourself, with others, or while reading. But the second leg of the journey is when you are taking in space itself in your body. This is when you're starting to work both the mind and the body at the same time or at different times. So you can do it at different times. This is allowed in this system. It doesn't have to come hand in hand. Remember the interpenetrative aspects of space. Means that it can be separated, can be treated separated, but they can also be the very same thing. And I think this is a great illustration, at least for me, why people can't accept the conclusions of quantum mechanics. Because they think they see a cat only being alive or only dead. That's what they think they see. And if the cat is not present, not felt, or not sensed, you do not feel that the cat is live or dead. It's not a true perception. The illusion is coming from our inherited perceptions, a gestalt, so to speak. And that's a choice. And by understanding that is a choice, you can ease up these things. And these are helping tools like the Klein bottle, like Gould's theorem, quantum mechanics, and so forth, that will help you to be able to even start the walk. But then you start, that's the second stage. Take in space, see the ventral and the dorsal surfaces. They are an important part of both thinking, imagery, and the bodily balance. But the bodily imbalance go hand in hand with these limitations. They are not a necessity. So we somehow started these limitations ourselves. But isn't it true? Once you realize that space interpenetrates itself, and that it's also even in a bottle form, or a this that obviously in some aspects seem to be so enclosed. It is not enclosed. Nothing is enclosed. And this is the process when you get more space. The reason for we are so two-dimensional are several, but one of those things are that we actually feel compressed. We feel that our body doesn't have space enough to exist because there's always things around us. And in the end, we become so accustomed in not having enough space around us. So it becomes something of our habitually perceived reality. And this might be a difference in this second stage. Now we're fighting habits. And we do that the James Clear way, little by little, baby steps if you want. Don't do it all by once. Once your body changes, once you get more free in your movement, once you acquire a bigger possibility to freedom within your own sensing, I would say, your own sensing. And by saying sensing, I don't separate between body or mind in this particular instance. It's a sensing of the mind. It's also a sensing of the body at the very same time. And that holds for sighing, getting fresh air, and you opening up the future and the past at the same time, because this is also something affecting time. We seem to think in daily life that there is an absolute difference between the past and the now, and that makes us cramped in a time waste manner. We think that time usually takes its model from space, that also time is a little bit like the normal perception of a can or a mug. It's enclosed, it doesn't have an opening, and it's not interpenetrative. It's completely shut out. But once you realize this different take on space, you will realize you can use that to open up time as well. Time doesn't have to come in separated movements that have no connection to any other movement. And there you can only inhabit one movement at a time, and the next moment you are gone, so to speak. And you only perceive, you only experience from moment to moment. And that experience is cut off from all other experiences. That is not a necessary trait of time at all. It doesn't even hold for all cultures on Earth. And that is easily questioned once you started with space. Once you start with space and you see it can be opened up, you can take this mug and you can fold it like a Möbius strip. You can actually literally turn this into either neck a cube. I would take some bending and some gluing, but you can actually turn it into Klein bottle. Because in principle all objects are both inside and outside. It's not a necessary limitation. I say that once and more because I'm amazed myself. I think it's just incredible, because what this second leg of the journey takes us to, it's nothing short of miraculous. I would say that. Because it's a well-perceived limitation on reality is that there's nothing outside the universe. Everything is self-contained. And there we have also on the time basis that we are in between the Big Bang and the Big Crunch. And within that little span we exist, and then we cease to exist because space itself disappears. Also limitations that is not necessary so. It's nothing you have to obey. Can be opened up, like this mug. Time itself can be opened up. And I really wonder if William Blake realized that, because his ferocious battle against Newton seemed to be unnecessary now. Even Newton could possibly have opened up his own space. Maybe he did after many years. That could well have happened. I don't think it happened. It would be very unlikely, but it could have gained some special knowledge from some book. I don't know, but it's opening in this day. We're lucky enough to live in 2022, and we realize in this time and age that space is possible to open, bend, fold, stretch. I just love it when I see on a YouTube clip I can recommend, see if I can find it, where they had this flat surface and I turned it into Klein bottle, and then it became flat surface again, emanating from flat surface, becoming something that can hold volume, liquid, you name it, and then returning to be something that is flat once more. Flattedness does not preclude or exclude volume. Also an interesting perception. And by looking at such clip, it's maybe halfway from the first step to the second step, somewhere in between there. And I like in-betweeners. 2 in-betweennesses a day, and maybe a coffee and a bun between meals. Can be nothing else but happy thinking, happy relaxation. You see, space and time are possible to open up. And I wish you all a very pleasant afternoon and say thank you very much. See, the walls seem to be shutting out space, but they don't, not necessarily so.